Okay, welcome to week 8, which is education and environmental sustainability. Um, Daman and I have divided up the work this week. Daman has prepared a summary of the McGrath readings, which you can access on Moodle. And he's also created a document for us to share resources for education and climate action. And you're welcome to add to that if you like. I am going to address each podcast in a short video, so we'll do 3 short videos this week. And you're welcome to respond to one or all of them if you like. I'm going to start with the Will Brem's interview with Arjen Wals, the 2018 at the University of the Netherlands. The Arjen Wals podcast starts with the discussion of the Sustainable Development Goals, which has 13 targets and 169 indicators. He expresses that what he thinks is positive about the SDGs, that the SDGs are more concrete than the Millennial Development Goals, and they also focus on the global north as well as the global south. He also states that these SDGs are again being used to rank countries and how they are going about achieving the SDGs, and also that the kind of complexity that comes with 169 indicators could begin, the interests may begin to compete with one another. When asked about climate change and how it's connected to education, Arjen turns around and asks, what are we sustaining through education? And what should we be disrupting? Should we be disrupting that which is unhealthy? And dividing values, educational values and community values into one or the other. On one side being solidarity, where we're teaching children to be creative, critical thinkers with entrepreneurial skills, instead of the more neoliberal values of strengthening individualism and capitalism, and teaching the value of being competitive. And that with these more neoliberal values, education can become just an extension of the economy. He states that the SDGs are inspiring educators to change their curriculums to a more living curriculum, and that there are eco schools engaged with environmental issues in a local way, driven by local community issues. And he gives the example of focusing on food systems, like having an edible school garden where a local restaurant could use the food coming out of the school's garden. And he talks a bit about how teachers in eco schools are linking their different subjects, whatever the subject may be, math or literature, to environmental sustainability. When Will Brem states that in 2040 the environmental will have changed drastically, and how do we as educators address this? His response is that it is unfair to expect that education can fix everything, and that there's a whole basin of tools from policies to politics that can be used, and that education is a small part of a much bigger picture. And he also states that education, like climate change, is a slow process with very large implications. And in response to people who say that it seems that this type of education seems to have an agenda, he says, yes, it does. It is pushing an agenda. It's pushing an agenda of the earth. It's pushing an agenda of humanity surviving. It's pushing an agenda of caring for one another and for other species. Wals asks us to consider whether or not our education can teach these kind of values in place of what he calls the hidden curriculum of consumerism. SDG 8 is about economic growth. Capitalism is basically assumed as a way of life. And we have an addiction to growth. But Wals states that it is now being challenged. He makes the statement of comparing sustained growth to sustained contraction and being able to do more than with less, which I thought was very interesting. And also, he makes the point that it's not included in the SDGs, but no extreme or alleviating extreme poverty is there, but no extreme wealth could be more effective in addressing poverty. But of course, it's not found in the SDGs. He also points out that the biggest environmental footprints are from people with masters and PhDs, and that the more educated you are, the more likely you are to have a large environmental footprint. And they talk a little bit about the hypocrisy that is in the industry, and about living in accordance with the values that we're trying to teach. Arjen questions the notion of sustainable development. He asks, do we need to sustain development? Which I thought was a very interesting point. And he talks about objectifying the earth, and to stop objectifying the earth and to move towards a more sustainable relationship with the world. One of the things that he says that I like the most is it's not about doing things better, but about doing better things. And then Will comes back to the previous point. He says, a child born today will be about 80 in 2100, when all of these dire predictions could come true. Meaning that we are now we could possibly be living amongst the last human generation. And he asked Arjen, how do you remain optimistic in this kind of environment? And Arjen states that there's a real need for hope, and that education just can't focus on the doom and the inequalities, because that could actually speed up the process of what's happening. And he talks about that things are changing and that he is optimistic, and he sees things like the development of recycling now becoming, closing cycles, and that there are independent schools where teachers are free and trusted to teach children a more localized curriculum, and that there are social movements and communities that are moving off the grid. But he does warn that we do have to be careful about, those things are now very expensive, and that we don't run into the same kind of bubble where only the rich can afford to live a life like that. And so he ends, or they end with talking about dissonance and how dissonance leads to learning, and that we can't learn anything if we're living within a bubble, because we need this dissonance and interactions with people that don't believe the same things that we do in order to learn anything.